to understanding the future events and prophecy. And I hope if you got nothing else out of it, there's a ton of information, but what's critical to know is it deals with both the Jews and the Gentiles, but primarily the Jews. And why that's critical, because as I said this morning, there are two different dispensations or timelines, programs, one for the Jews and one for the church, and they are totally independent of one another. You can't put them together. And so that's why it makes so much sense why the church is going to be taken out of the way so the Jews can be brought back to the forefront. Now, what Nathan said is absolutely correct, where right now they have completed how many of the years, and by the way, I like an interactive teaching, okay? So I'll ask questions, feel free to talk out and everything, but that's just how I am. If you don't have the answer, I'll fill in the gaps, so don't worry about it. But what Nathan said this morning, the Jews are under punishment, under judgment right now from the Lord, okay? And how many years was it ordained for them to be punished? 490, right? 490. How many of those 490 years have they completed? 483, okay? So just like Nathan well pointed out, we have a gap. It quit. Their punishment actually quit, their divine punishment to a degree. Now there's semantics involved at the cross, like Jesus, like Nathan said, and then they were put on the back burner at the cross. But because of their rejection of the Messiah, Jesus, God said, okay, I'm not going to deal with you right now, so your 490-year program is now on hold. You're on the back burner. Guess what? I'm now going to usher in the church age, which again, nobody ever knew about. That was one of the great mysteries, one of the great things that the Jews marveled at. Because you got to remember, in those days, the Gentiles were dogs to the Jews, literally. In fact, Jesus even went along with that with the lady who begged for the crumbs. Often she says, don't you even give them to the dogs? And you notice he did not refute the fact that she was a dog, going along with the Jewish theology of who the Gentiles were. So for the Gentiles to be saved was almost unfathomable for these people. So therefore, the Jews are put on the back burner, and now we have that gap that begins that Nathan talked about at the cross. And that gap is carried on up until this church age right now. But again, as he well pointed out, it's going to pick up again. And when does their punishment pick up again? What's that? Well, close. Rapture. Rapture of the church, okay? So the rapture starts. Now, Nathan is technically correct. When they signed a treaty, that really begins to enforce. So we have the rapture as the next big event that's going to occur. And then I, along with a lot of people, and Nathan agreed, there's going to be an intermediate amount of time between the rapture and the start of the tribulation. Because there's a number of events that have to line up for the tribulation. We just can't go full force into it. And you know what? That intermediate period of time could be a matter of a year, it could be 6 months, it could be 3 months, it could be 5 years. We just don't know, but we know a lot of things have to line up first. So let's say that we have the rapture, then the tribulation begins. The tribulation is divided into 2 time periods, as Nathan somewhat alluded to. And that time period is 3.5 years and 3.5 years, with the abomination of the temple, where the Antichrist again sets himself up as the God of this world. And why that's critically important, a couple of reasons. Number one, the Jews right now want to rebuild the temple. They want to and they need to. And in order for Daniel's prophecy to be accurate, everybody else's, they have to rebuild that temple. So the closer they get to doing that, the closer we are right now to the tribulation period. Now, the only question is going to be, will they build that temple before the rapture or after the rapture? Frankly, we don't know. It would make more sense if it was done afterwards. And frankly, with the Christians off the face of the earth, it would make sense that that's when it would occur. However, we wouldn't be dogmatic on that one way or the other. But the temple's a critical component, because when the Antichrist comes on the scene, and let me just paint a little picture for you. Picture the entire world. The rapture has occurred. We're already going downhill with all the wars, rumors of wars, and everything else. Economically, things are a mess. And so just picture for a second that the rapture has occurred. The world is in total chaos. And we have upheaval like crazy, and now all of a sudden we have this great man that comes on the scene, and I'm not going to say it's going to be the next day, but at some point in this intermediate period, and he goes, hey, you know what, guys? Good news. I have an explanation why they're gone, and it's a good reason why they're gone, and now they're out of the way. We can get things back to normal and get things the way we intended them to be all along. So he'll present the rapture as a good news scenario for the world and come up with a logical explanation why it occurred. In fact, let's go right now to 2 Thessalonians, and let's get a little flavor of how he's going to do that. Because this Antichrist is going to be a big player on the scene, and everything's going to revolve around him and what he does, and that's why Daniel alluded to him so much. And then he also Christ alluded to that prophecy as being a preeminent prophecy around. So go to 2 Thessalonians 2. And let's look at what's being said right here. Now, I'm going to start with what Nathan talked about here, because this is one of the passages that really trip people up because we change what we're talking about midstream. And if you don't know that and understand the days that are being talked about, most people confuse the second coming of Jesus with the rapture. Okay? They don't understand they are two distinct comings for two distinct reasons. The rapture of the church is obviously to take us up out of the way so these events can start. The second coming is at the very end, right here, of the time of trouble, the time of the tribulation, the 7 years, when he comes back to set up his 1,000-year rule. Two very distinct reasons why he comes. And we're going to see that right here in these passages. So let's pick it up in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. We'll start in verse 1, and I'll break it down for us so we get a little bit here. Now, set this up just for a second. Paul in 1 Thessalonians had taught the Thessalonians about the rapture. They were well versed in end time events. They knew what was going on, okay? Now, Paul is writing a follow-up letter to them because they're thinking, hey man, we're being tribulated, right, Nathan? We're being tribulated on. So as a result of that, because it's a word, it's a new word. So because of the tribulation they were under and the trouble they were under, they were thinking, okay, this persecution's so great, we must be into tribulation, so we missed the rapture of the church, okay? Well, Paul's going to explain to them two things. Number one, he's going to explain to them how they know when the rapture is, and number two, how they know when the day of the Lord is. And what is the day of the Lord? The day of the Lord is simply the 7-year tribulation period. It goes by two names in the Old Testament, okay? The two names are the day of the Lord. Anytime you hear the day of the Lord, it never, never, never means the rapture. It never means anything good, ever. You will never find one place when the day of the Lord is good. So if somebody says it and tries to connotate it with something good, just laugh at them because they're wrong. Okay? The other thing that is called is the time of Jacob's trouble. Okay? Why would it be called the time of Jacob's trouble? Say again? It's all about Israel. Yeah, duh. Now, doesn't that make sense if this is all about Israel, that the church is going to be gone? And we're going to see a lot of these little proof texts as we go through and break this thing down and try and put a little cohesiveness to it all. Because it's really rather simplistic. We just sometimes get tripped up because the scriptures are somewhat difficult to understand. So we have the time of Jacob's trouble. And by the way, the tribulation itself is also broke down in two parts. We have the first 3.5 years, which is called just the tribulation, okay? Then we have the midway point when the Antichrist sets himself up in the temple and demands from the Jews that they worship him as God. They demand it. Now here's what's tricky about that. When he does that, remember, the Jews signed a peace treaty with him, guaranteeing their peace. So they're happy and they're thinking life is good, and he allows them to rebuild the temple. They get the temple all done and they're ready to set the thing up and start the sacrifices. Guess what? He goes, oh, by the way, now that the temple's done, I'm God, you got to worship me. That moment is when they realized they blew it. And they realized that they just made the biggest mistake of their lives. And they say right here, that's when they refuse and they recognize that that is truly the Antichrist. And that's finally when their hearts start turning to Jesus in earnest, because they knew they blew it. That's when Jesus talked about when that moment happens, when he demands worship as God, you need to flee. You don't go home, you don't pack, you don't take anything. Wherever you're at, you flee that very second, because once you refuse, and believe me, the Jews will refuse, then the Antichrist will unleash all his fury against God's chosen people, and he will try to wipe them out like they're dogs.